As I prepare for doing some lecturing on physical and sensory needs, that area of special educational need, it's made me think about what I would like to say on that particular issue. So I'm going to actually be focusing on something called auditory processing disorder. But before that, I thought I'd just mention that when we talk about physical and sensory needs, it's more than wheelchairs, braille and hearing aids, As with any area of special need, the severity will vary from one person to another. So you can't just sort of it goes back to that lived experience idea that I've spoken about before. I've met somebody and I've worked with somebody who's got cerebral palsy, therefore I know what it is to have cerebral palsy and what their experiences are and what accommodations they need and what I should be doing. It's not as simple as that. I haven't met one and therefore know it all. I know that child's experience with cerebral palsy, how it affects them, what they need for supporting them, and so on. So we need to always, with all special needs, we need to be mindful of the fact that everything is a sort of spectrum. There's not a black and white, what one experiences, another experiences. It varies. So today, with the focus on hearing, it's not actually hearing, it's auditory processing. However, some of the issues that will be raised would also apply to somebody, or could also apply to somebody who's got varying types of hearing loss. But auditory processing disorder is not hearing loss. That's not what it is. You can have actually perfect hearing, as in you can hear all the different sounds, but it's the processing. So it's not the coming into the ear, it's the reaching the brain, and it's the way the brain interprets what it is hearing. And it can be because there's been a blockage, like with glue ear, and therefore not all the sounds are getting through to the brain. It could be something like that. If that's happened when a child is very young, then the child has developed more complex processing than might otherwise happen in somebody who hasn't had such issues. So you can have auditory processing disorder even if you have perfect hearing. It's a disorder of the processing side of it. It can also be an aspect of specific learning difficulties such as dyslexia, dyspraxia. It can come along with things like ADHD, other things, or speech and language communication needs, other things that other areas of special needs could also be accompanied by auditory processing disorder. It can also be misdiagnosed as another learning need because so many of the things I'm going to talk about actually could be resultant from having dyslexia, having dyspraxia, or whatever. Autism, it can easily be mistaken for autism. So it's important that we actually understand it, and it's an area that there is less understanding of than some of our other areas. It can also exist as a standalone thing, auditory processing disorder. So it could be that, for example, whole words are missed in a sentence, so you're getting every other word. It could be that sounds within words, so it could be that you're missing a medial sound, that's the sound in the middle of a word. So, instead of hearing, split, if you're just hearing spit, is that spoilt? Is it split? Is it spilt? You're not quite sure. And the context is therefore important for fully understanding what's being said. So it could also be not just missing sounds. It could be that the sounds are coming in a muddled way. So you're processing them in the wrong order, not in the order in which they actually entered the ear, if you like, for want of a better way of putting it. But you're processing them in a muddled way, so the order is getting wrong. And therefore, when you go to speak or when you go to write, the sequence isn't right. The grammatical structures are immature or just not there. So it can come across in different ways. You can see how if you're missing sounds, it can very much appear that it's dyslexia, and it may not be. And as with all good Senkos, you go off and make sure the child had a hearing test. The hearing test comes back as perfect hearing. There's nothing wrong with the hearing. That just can disguise it even more. So it's a very hard thing to specifically identify. It could also be that you're not taking in everything in a social interchange. So if you're missing bits out, you're getting it wrong. So it could be that the rules of the game are that, you're playing it, and when you get tagged, you have to stay still until somebody else releases you. Well, if you haven't taken in the bit about somebody else releasing you, you get cross because they didn't stay tagged. But they were actually released, but you missed that bit of the information. And, so you can see how you could get it wrong in the playground, as it were. So quite often, somebody with auditory processing might want to take control of the situation. They may want to be in charge, because if they're in charge, they know what the rules are. And then they feel safer. What might also happen is they might isolate. They might step back from the social interaction. In which case, the isolation or the not getting it can come across as being on the autistic spectrum. And it might not be that. It might be simply not receiving all the messages and interpreting them correctly. Rather than being autistic, it's actually about the way the spoken messages were heard and interpreted. So you can see how things can come across in that way. There are key points in schooling where this can be more noticeable. So, for example, years 3 and 4, the demands get greater. So you could have a child, and we find it with children who are dyslexic, who they've been really good at the early phonics stage, really good. And the parents go, oh, but they could read and write really well. They get to the next stage, and suddenly they're looking at polysyllabic words, and not just simple what we call CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant words. They're much more complex, and sounds are being missed, and therefore the written work and even the spoken work is not necessarily as it should be. So the demands increase at year 3 and 4, but also year 7, when it's not just about the work getting more complex, but the whole environment is more complex. You've got several different teachers, you've got an hour of this, an hour of that, an hour of that, switch, but switch classrooms and switch teachers and switch the way the teacher speaks, so that you've got to get used to another style of speaking, and there's so much going on that it could intensify things. As I said, sequencing ideas can get muddled. Just as sequencing the words within a sentence, the actual ideas can, which throws everything all over the place. They're just some of the things. I could talk for a lot longer, but I like to keep these a bit brief. So I'm going to talk about a few of the things that can help with auditory processing disorder. Having visuals. It sounds really simple, but one of the visuals is the way we speak. You'll notice when I'm speaking on a video, I know I speak too fast. I know that. However, I do tend to have good mouth movement. I don't speak like this with my mouth hardly talking at all, so that you can't see what I'm saying. I don't speak like that. I speak with bigger mouth movements, and like I'm indicating that it's my mouth that I'm talking about. I use my hands a lot. If I'm talking about reading, I often do a sign like that. Singing, those are things called it's a part of cued speech or Makaton. There are different sorts of visual bodily supports of language that you can do that will help somebody because they've got something else to focus on. Make sure the child can see you and is close to you, because although it's not about the hearing, it's about the filtering things out. So if a child with auditory processing disorder is sat in the middle of a room, they have to somehow distinguish your voice from the pencil falling on the floor, that child turning around and talking to this child, that child ruffling their papers and all the rest of it. All these other things are all sounds coming into the ear, and the processing, how do I sort out which words matter? If you can imagine being at a party with a loud by the speakers, and it's booming out music, and you're trying to have a conversation with someone, you'll miss bits, and eventually you say, let's go outside, and you sort of indicate what you want to do, and you go outside and you speak where it's calmer. That's what it's like all the time for somebody with an auditory processing disorder. For some of the people, that's what it's like some of the time. So we need to think about how we can make sure the sounds are getting more directly. You can use hearing supports for that, so it's going directly from your mouth to their ear. Okay, you can do things like that. But as I say, there's cued articulation, which helps us know, like k, g. What's the difference? One's voiced, g. One's unvoiced, k, f, v. You know, there's signs we do that show, they indicate where the sound comes from. K and g are here. F, v. The tongue is coming out. So these are signs, and it's a set structure of signs that you do to support the production of the sounds. So you can use that. You can use cued speech, which, like I'm saying, you've got sing, you've got book, you've got look, write. There's all sorts of visuals that help support it. There's things like PECS, picture exchange, where you actually show pictures and exchange pictures and can take things on there. They support the words, they support the sound, they support the hearing. As I say, I speak too fast on these, I know, but speaking slowly, facing the person, and good articulation. Developing their memory, because memory is a big factor. When you are processing things slowly, you've got to hang on to information for longer before all of that processing has happened. So developing memory skills, playing memory games is really good, especially auditory memory games. I went to market and I bought, and so on. Allow thinking time. Allow time for the processing to happen before you expect them to give an answer, because the process of taking in the question, working out what it is you're expected to say, you're expected to think about, working out what you want to say, and then producing that sound, saying it, that's quite complicated for somebody with auditory processing disorder. So we need to allow the time for them to think about the answer. In a minute, I'm going to ask you what 4 3s are. So 4 times 3 in a minute. Blah, 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 blah. What was 4 times 3? So they've had time to process it and formulate their answer. Really important. Keep information on the board longer. When I said about visuals, you've got information you've written on the board, you're then talking, you're going on to something else. Quite often we have 2 boards now. We have an interactive whiteboard and a normal whiteboard. So alternate which ones you're working on, then the information can stay there for longer, which allows the child more time to process that information, and they're doing it through a visual way as well as an auditory way. Chunking that information, not just telling them 10 things at once, break it down, first, next, then, and maybe just have, first I want you to do this, once that's done, now I would like you to do this. If you've got and gradually build it up, but chunking it down so it's not too much information at once. Maybe have it written down so they can cross things off as they've done them, and they can see the order in which they're meant to happen, because sequencing can be a big issue. Another one, and I say there's so much more I could say, but I'm just keeping this brief. Having some small group work, working with a partner or a small group makes processing the information a bit easier, because there aren't so many distractions. And if you know somebody has an auditory processing difficulty, then make sure their group is in a quiet place, without disruptions, without distractions, without other sounds happening. And if that child is doing some writing and doesn't need to be listening to your instructions, let them have some headphones. Let them shut out all that buzzing, all that noise that's coming in and in and in. Let it be shut out. So maybe some headphones, either silently or, just ear defender type ones, or listening to something that is maybe calming so that they can focus on their work. They're just a few ideas, and I'm sure there'll be more in weeks to come. Thank you.